you're ready.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the room today. Our discussion is in honor of the International Day of Peace, specifically looking into the Eritrean perspective. The International Day of Peace is a day dedicated by the United Nations, and it looks into it observes the dedication of world peace and the abstinence of war and violence. This day was created or first celebrated in 1981 and was kept by many nations and military groups and people throughout the world, as they are individuals who seek peace both globally and nationally. Very important for us to
You're breaking up. If you're still speaking, you're breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Am I audible?
You are now, yeah.
Okay, so this day is to commemorate, like I mentioned before, peace, both globally and nationally, and it's a global effort. Yeah, sorry, and was established by the UN resolution for peace. Now, peace can be defined as lack of war or the creation of harmony and stability in a region. Now, this is very important for the people of Eritrea, considering that we haven't had peace for the past 30 years since independence, and even prior to that. Sorry, just give me one. Sorry about that. Yeah, the concept of peace is a choice for many countries, especially developing countries, to push for the construct of this concept of peace. It is a perspective for many individuals and countries to define peace as they see fit for their countries. Peace is what we make of it, and peace is a choice for human beings and communities. And collectively, we need to achieve it and strive for this idea of peace. Our communities, especially the community, is suffering because of the lack of peace that we do face. And there's a lot of learning for us to do to ensure that peace comes with, I guess, our societies, and we are able to clearly differentiate between what is this coherent picture of what we see being considered as peace and what we want peace to be. Now, when looking at peace, especially in our perspective, what is peace and how do we achieve this idea of peace? That is something for us as individuals and groups and collectives to come together and decide. The International Day that was established by the United Nations embraced this powerful tool that helps advocate for the bringing together of people from different aspects of life to ensure that we are both organizations and individuals and governments coming together through different actions to achieve this idea of raising self-awareness and raising the awareness and pushing for this idea of peace. That's very important for us. Now, this idea, when it comes to peace, we need to acknowledge and briefly look into individuals who are trying to create peace, because that is very important, and that is something we are lacking as a global society. Right, so for this room specifically, we will be looking at 4 points. The first one would be the recognition of this international holiday and others like it. The second point we'll be looking at would be the lack of of scholarly research that is outside the specific fields of refugees, humanitarians, and whatnot. So scholarly research that includes other aspects of life that has been hindered by this lack of peace that we see in Eritrea, and that this lack of research has hindered our progress and development in the region and in Eritrea specifically. The third point we'll be looking at is increased of refugees and the mass exodus from Eritrea, and how this has been impacted by the lack of peace in the region. And the last point we'll be looking at the internal and external factors that play a role in the region, in the country, especially with this idea of the lack of peace that we have in Eritrea. So the first point that would be looking at, like I mentioned before, was the recognition of international holidays. These are national events such as World Peace Day, the International Day of the Disappeared, Refugee Day, and whatnot, are very important for us to observe and recognize, because these are days that were established by the global community, the international community, mainly the United Nations. And these were days that were used, as mentioned, as advocacy tools to help us remember or move us in the right direction when it comes to these. It also creates this unity between the nations globally, and also within the nation. We are able to come together and celebrate one day or commemorate one day together instead of having our own events separately. So when it comes to specifically the International Day of Peace, we can collectively come together. Sorry, but can you guys hear me? Like that?
Can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. So the International Day of so recognizing these internationally recognized days helps us, like I said, create this unity amongst the different groups, and may offer or may be a way for actors to come together and for them to have an opportunity to organize activities related to the themes that have been assigned for those days, and also keep us as a global community as well, to address issues that affect us both globally and nationally. Organizations are also able, with the help of civil societies and governments together, both in the private and public sectors, to create action and move forward, create awareness, and move forward into bettering our societies and our communities, and strive for a better world. So a majority of nations do follow and do recognize the International Day of the International Day for Peace. It is globally recognized, and I believe that we at Eritrean recognize this day as well. So by observing this day, we will be able to come together as a collective with and under the banner of the international and global community, and that is very vital for us to recognize this event. Sorry, you can for the next.
Thank you. I guess. Thank you, Amira. I believe peace is what we make out of it, and peace also is also, as you said, is a choice. And in here, I would like to make an acknowledgement and also to honor anyone who is a peace seeker in the world, and there are a lot of people who are out there trying to create peace. And when we say to create, it means literally the word to create it, as to find it within the different conflict zones and within the different violent areas where peace seems to be a dream. And there are a lot of people who try to create peace within these regions, and acknowledging these people regardless where in the world they might be. And more importantly, if they are within our region, the Horn of Africa, or specifically in Eritrea, there are people who are trying to create this, and we give recognition to them at this moment as we speak on International Peace Day. These are people who should be honored and should be respected for the work that they do. And I wouldn't like to pass without acknowledging the people who are involved in these projects. And a lot of people lose their lives because of while working on trying to bring about peace in different communities. Um, Moving from that, I think one of the problems that we have as Eritreans is we lack the essence of peace, the understanding of peace, the necessity of peace, the understanding of the necessity of peace for us to to live in a world where there is peace. Even when we leave home, when we leave our countries, and we enjoy the different countries, the different democracies, it's not only about freedom, it's also about the peace that we live in. And then when you see people supporting wars, in Eritrea or in the region, it kind of bewilders you. Why would someone who is living in peace support the destabilization of communities and societies? Because war and the lack of peace doesn't just come with without any cost. It costs communities and societies a lot of things uh, for it is something that um, affects every single aspect of societal structures. And these societal structures are built and strengthened when there is peace. And in the lack of peace, the societal structures get disappeared, dismantled, they get destroyed. And peace doesn't necessarily mean the absence of war. Peace also means the sought for harmony, the when there is no war, it doesn't necessarily mean there is peace, and that's one thing that we need to understand. And I believe over the past 18 years, or let's say 20 years, and and I believe over the past 20 years, the state between Eritrea and Ethiopia, where there was no war, no peace, state that was uh, present between the two countries, had left different communities and different societies uh, in on standby, especially the communities and societies which reside along the borders between the two countries. And to imagine living in a place where everything is on standby, you can't even live your life normally because you have the prospect of having either war or a conflict erupting at any point is something that's bothering you. And for 80 years, that's a whole generation that's born and raised in a state where there is no peace. Um, and I believe if we look into our developmental process as a countries and as a communities, I think it's heavily been affected by what we see, by the conflict and the lack of peace that we had. Eritrea under the issue of Eritrean sovereignty was had stopped all the democratic processes. um I don't want to go into the idea of like was it like legitimate or not, but even if we look at the consequences, where the University of Asmara was closed, for example, the whole of Eritrean society was militarized, and the idea of going into war became prevalent every day. That our sovereignty, and also the fact that we might be raided by an external power, is a narrative that's been pushed throughout the past 18 years. Regardless of where we stand from that, was it good or bad? Was it right or wrong? Was it true or not? These are other questions that we can ask. But to begin with, what are the effects of this kind of thinking? What are the effects of these kind of policies on us, as a community and societies? The effects were devastating. As we speak today, it's very rare to find scholars from the region, from the Horn of Africa, specifically from Eritrea, on different aspects of knowledge. Even when we do go out of that region and we do tend to pursue um, any form of education, our education is to a very high extent limited to social sciences, limited to, even within social sciences, very limited to refugee studies, immigration studies. This is because these features and these um, fields became the defining fields for us, because our lives had been defined by being a refugee. Our lives had been defined by being an immigrant. And the definition, and this definition that's been stuck with us for over 50, 60, 70 years now, a whole country is living as refugees, is living as an immigrant, is living as IDPs, internally displaced people. So, and this is leading us to not having a normal life even in the countries that we go to. A lot of people migrate. A lot of people leave their homes and come to Europe, to America, to Australia. But what happens is, like, because of the effect of what's happening back home, what's happening in Eritrea, even after independence, we still don't have peace where we are. We still don't have peace in the countries that we are in. And that's something that people need to acknowledge. I think the sought for peace should be in the forefront of every single project that we do. It is not about just changing a regime. It's also about seeking peace within us as different communities and societies. Creating the peace. It's not because we want to we want to dominate or to have a country that's ruled by us. It's just, at least we want to create a peaceful environment where all the um, concepts that we talk about, the concept of justice, the concept of democracy, the concept of rule of law, all these concepts are good, but they can only be realized and actualized if there is peace. They can only happen if there is peace. And I think understanding that should be the foundation that we lay our works on as Eritreans speaking here. And we still have a lot of work to be done. For example, we don't if you look into the different cultures that we have in Eritrea, there is very little written about them. There's very little exploration that was done to them. There's very little studies about these different cultures, how they evolved and how they came to be, about the different language that we have, about the different aspects of our lives. We are yet to explore them. We are yet to know them, let alone explore them. And that's just because of the absence of peace. You know them, you explore them when there is peace, when there are studies, when there is university, when there is a room for development. And I think especially the younger generation, I think the centrality of the younger generation in creating peace is very important. And that's what we're lacking right now, because when we see, especially with the current situation, that the war that erupted in Tigray, um, all we see is polarization of the young minds who should be leading these projects of peace, who should be asking and seeking to reconcile and create some form of peace between the two nations, and not allowing anyone, regardless of who these belligerents are, not allowing anyone to drive their understanding of the politics of the region. We should be calling for peace, not because we want, uh, uh, we might lose the war or we might win the war, not, but because peace as important for us as it is for the others. And after any war, any kind of conflict and violence, the last thing that you do is just you come on the table and you negotiate, compromise. And if that is the case, why shouldn't we start with a compromise? Why shouldn't we bury our ego and say, uh, peace is the thing that we need? And I think in these international days that's been allocated by the either the United Nations, and primarily by the United Nations, they don't come out of nothing. This world went through different wars where millions and millions of people were lost because of the war. First World War, the Second World War, and other wars. But at the end, people realized that we need to have some form of peace. We need to have some to understand and learn to coexist. And from that emerge these ideas of having the United Nations, of having these days which are recognized by every single state. And for us as Eritreans, at least the least that we can do is cling into these days, because sadly and for various reasons, we tend to not agree upon specific days. There is always a duality that defines the Eritrean identity. The Eritrean psyche is always defined by either the duality or the multiplicity of ideas about specific topic. And at least we can come upon one specific understanding that let's adopt these days, the international days, which are recognized by different countries as days where we can celebrate and we can try to forge a way through them for our national unity, for our causes that we're trying to advance. And I believe the International Day of Peace is one of the days that we can and we should work to recognize and make it present in our communities and societies, for us to kind of get into some level of humanity, because it seems that we don't think as humans as much as we think about power. The thinking about being human, where we need peace and development cannot. They are intertwined. You cannot have development unless you have peace. And the failure to recognize this is what and the thinking that power can bring any form of development is what is defining us. And I believe now we have to think through our actions and the way we're doing things, to rethink our different strategies that we followed for the past 30 years. Eritrea is a result of a struggle. Eritrea is a nation that came out of struggle, 30 years of peaceless days and nights and minutes and hours, I should say, where war defined our psyche. But now it's time to heal and recognize that this scattered and shattered psyche that we have, which is defined and outlined by war, should be remedied and healed. And one of the ways of doing that is to have a lot of talk about peace, more than about war and power. All the concepts, as I said earlier, can be recognized and actualized and realized if we have peace. Justice can only happen when there is peace. Democracy can only progress and happen and be practiced when there is peace. And all of the other concepts that we ask for can only happen when there is peace. I'm going to conclude this point here. I'll pass it to Amira. Thank you for listening, by the way.
Thank you. Right, so Max spoke about peacemaking and peace building. It's very important for us to aim to reduce a relapsing into more conflicts and trying to strengthen our national capabilities at a level that we are able to manage conflicts both externally, so in a geopolitical sense, as well as internally. Now, one major issue that we face as Eritreans is the mass exodus of Eritrean refugees out of Eritrea, looking for better lives, be it in the West or other countries. The refugee crisis, I think the most important reason or the most important question to ask when looking at the mass number of people, increasing number as well, of individuals fleeing Eritrea, the reason for this is simply because there's lack of peace. Because there was a choice made to hinder the progress and hinder the peace in the region, and therefore we have individuals who are fleeing the country because of the lack of peace. As many of you do know, Eritrea is run by a totalitarian government that has been in power for now 30 years. There have been no elections, no constitution, and no independent press in the country, and even a whiff of political activism will sentence you for, I guess, immediate disappearance and detention. There have been reports. By both the United Nations Inquiry on Human Rights as well as human rights reports that have stated the number of refugees that are fleeing the country, and it's a large number. And these are due to the human rights abuses that are in the country, that are being perpetrated by the current regime that we have: arbitrary arrests and indefinite detentions. There are widespread prisons, as many of you do know, across the country. And these are not just prisons, they are methods of torture that are used by the current regime. And this is a big issue when it comes to the lack of harmony, the lack of stability, and that lack of comfort that you can have as a citizen of a country, knowing that you might be next. You might be the next to be arrested if you say another word. Also, the Eritrean government has created this idea of spies, where there's lack of trust, and with lack of trust comes lack of, again, peace. You're not comfortable living in your own country. The issue of refugees goes far beyond just the past few years, but it has been going on for the past 20 plus years. When you look at reports of refugees, there's an estimated almost 500,000 refugees that are currently displaced in countries all over the world. The report that I found records the host countries as being Sudan, Sweden, Ethiopia, Germany, and Switzerland, with Ethiopia having the largest number of refugees, of about 164,000 refugees. However, there are other countries that do hold refugees, including Uganda. The issue of
you're breaking up if you're speaking.
Sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, back now. Right. So the issue of refugees is also related to the national service, or the compulsory slavery-like national service that is implemented in the country, and this is one of the main issues that we see in Eritrea. And this was imposed as a method used by the government to increase his hold on the individuals in the country. It is impossible for people to leave the country or to even move within the different regions of the country. So that is also another form of lack of peace. So when we say there is lack of peace in the country, it has directly impacted the increasing number of refugees as we see them today. Hundreds and thousands of individuals have fled Eritrea, making it one of the largest countries with refugees, according to the United Nations. And this is concerning globally for both the countries that are hosting these refugees as well as the United Nations. However, the government of Eritrea still refuses to accept these charges that have been laid against him when it comes to, with regards to, I guess, humanitarian or lack of humanitarian approaches in the country. When looking at the issue of refugees, the PFDJ, or the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, has remained the sole party in power and has full control over the affairs in the country. And this has caused, again, like I said, an increasing number of abuses in the country, unlawful killings by security officials, tortures, beatings of prisoners and individuals, and this has resulted in deaths of individuals all over the country. The National Service has also been a reason for many individuals to flee. But another important point I think that people don't mention is also the lack of economic opportunities in Eritrea. Therefore, people do have to flee because there is that issue that they cannot work to feed themselves. So that's another reason when you look at lack of peace. Now, looking at refugees, this is just in the past 20 so years. If we look at the refugee crisis also prior to this, we have the issue of the refugees that fled in the mid-60s. This is during the annexation of Eritrea by Ethiopia. We had the first wave of refugees that fled Eritrea to Sudan after the Ethiopian army had invaded a market center in Karan, as well as the second wave of refugees that also fled to Sudan. This was also in the mid-70s. And we still, till this day, have these refugees still in these locations because of the lack of peace that we have in the region. So I think I tried to say this very, very strongly that peacekeeping should be, or peacemaking should be the next step for us to ensuring that we see these refugees go back home and live a respectable life in their homes, in their countries, without having to worry about any atrocities that will be committed against them. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'll now look briefly into the Eritrea's position in peacemaking and also peace creating in the region. Specifically, Eritrea since independence hasn't been a force for peace, honestly speaking, and I think that's very saddening because as a nation which has experienced war and lack of peace for 30 years, and even prior to that, as a result of the different works and movements that we had prior to our independence, for the federation time, even before that, there was always friction and lack of peace and invasion by external forces and powers, by the Turks, by the Italians, by the British. This is a country which has seen many leaders and invaders for a very, very long time. And I think the moment that we have gained our independence, the expectation is to be a country where that has longed for peace to be a tool and a medium and a mean for peace. Yet what's saddening is like we haven't followed on that route. In fact, we went down a slippery route where we became an agent for the stability in the region as a nation, as a country. And that's obviously we can blame the ruling group for that. However, I think the responsibility should be taken by all of us. And the reason I say that is because the failure to also the people who might be opposing to the policies that are followed by PFDJ or the current ruling party, I think the failure to provide the alternative to create the alternative, which is peace, is something that should be acknowledged, and I think people should be taking responsibility for that. So just if we have a quick look at the timeline that Eritrea had followed in the region. Obviously, some of this could be affected by the geopolitics of the region, but overall, the role of Eritrea in the region hasn't been very positive. In 1995, Eritrea was in a war with Yemen, the islands of Hanish, These are islands which a disputed island between Eritrea and Yemen. The final ruling of the court was to the what is known as Hanish Saghir to be given to Eritrea and Hanish Kabir to be given to Yemen. Regardless of that, I believe even if we, because there are still some people who still believe that the ruling wasn't yet. Yes, it wasn't in our favor, but the Hanish is an Eritrean island. So, but regardless of where you stand on this argument, whether it was an Eritrean argument or not, I think the war shouldn't be the option. There's so many reasons. If we had to go to an internationally recognized court after the war, then why not do it in the very beginning? Why not start with it? Why not start with the court process and procedures instead of just going into war and then after a loss of lives and livelihoods going to war? So the Eritrea went into war in 1995 with Yemen. Later on in 1997, Eritrea went into war with Sudan. And in 1998, obviously, a year later. So we're talking when we talk about 95, November 1995, we're talking a few years, literally less than 3 years, 2 years after Eritrea's official independence and recognition by the United Nations. Eritrea became officially independent in 93. And when we talk about 95, we're talking about 2.5 years from May 1993 till November 1995. So Eritrea went into war with Yemen. Less than 2 years later, Eritrea went into war with Sudan. Less than a year later, Eritrea went into war with Ethiopia in May 1998. And I'm not here to talk about who started the war and all of that, but it is something that happened. And we could have resolved all these issues by negotiation and by having less stubborn and approach to them. Because the moment that you're stubborn, the other people are stubborn as well. And what happens is like there's a loss of lives that happen, and these lives cannot be replaced at all. You can say whatever it is that you want to say, but you cannot replace someone who's lost their lives. You cannot bring them back. They're gone forever, and the pain that their families had to endure is bigger than what we could understand. Their families, their loved ones, their kids, or their children who were left behind, their friends, all of this, and a whole generation was lost in that war, the 98-2000 war. A whole generation was lost in that war. The estimated number by the Eritrean government is 20,000, about 20,000. But the reality is the number goes far beyond the 20,000. When they start announcing the martyrs in 2003, almost every single household had lost one, at least one. There are households who lost 4, 5, 3, which means that this estimation wasn't as accurate as we would expect it to be. And then, following that timeline, then Eritrea had supported the Sudanese SPLM, the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement at that time, led by Dr. John Garang, and they invaded Kassala. So. And then Eritrea was involved in the war in Somalia later on into 2006, in Yemen, the current state in Tigray. These are different wars that Eritrea is heavily involved in. That's why we can conclude that Eritrea hasn't been a tool for peace in the region for a very long time. You can argue about the geopolitics and the interests of the country, but the interests of the country cannot be served by destabilizing another communities and other countries. The only way to serve your interests is by creating friendship, by creating a room for peace where people can strive to economically to grow and prosper as different nations. You don't have to tie your economy to the economy of another nation, but you don't also have to use war, because war is not cost effective. It's not something that you can fund. If we can, and I'm going to say this, if we can fund war, we can definitely fund peace. If we can fund war, we can fund coexistence. If we can fund war, we can fund development. So this is something that we need to understand. Funding peace is more important than funding war, because war is not only money, it's not only resources, it's also lives. And importantly, most important within that, I think we also need to look into the internal dimension of this peace that we're talking about. Meaning that Eritreans within themselves, I think it is, if anything, that we need to take away from today's session, or this room that we have, should be, I think we need to start thinking about creating an internal peace within us. The different communities and the different societies and the different groups and parties and political groups and organizations. I think every single one of them and of us, we need to, in a way, we need to come up with creative ideas to create peace, to bring about peace, to build peace between these different organizations, different communities, different societies, different parties, political parties, or even civil societies. Otherwise, if it is going to be a rivalry forever, then we can't bring peace. I think we need to develop, to start thinking in a cooperative way, where we could help each other, we could depend upon each other in a way or another. We don't have to dissolve in each other, but we can create a relationship where peace exists, and that peace would lead to some form of cooperation. And I believe that's the internal dimension that we need to look into as we progress through the coming weeks and years, because the lack of peace in between the different communities and nation and ethnicities and tribes and clans in Eritrea and regions. Regionalism is one of the worst things that we have in Eritrea. It hinders our progress. It hinders any single project that you see in Eritrean politics, societal projects, civil society projects. All of them, regionalism comes to the forefront. And this region, we need to reconcile with it. We need to create peace across regions. We need to create peace across the divide, building the bridge of peace through the divide of region, religion, ethnicity, language. All of these issues can only be overcome if we create a culture of peace and respect and coexistence. And from peace emerges respect, emerges harmony, emerges the necessity for coexistence, emerges development. All of these things emerge justice, emerge democracy, emerge the rule of law. So all of this can be extracted if and only if there is peace. Otherwise, we can't dream about peace. Thank you. We'll now open the floor. If anyone has anything to add to the conversation. For those of you who are in the audience, if you would like to add anything to the conversation, please do raise your hand. We'll bring you up. and then if people come up, we will give them the opportunity. Please be very brief in what you're going to say, and either a comment or a question, and then we'll make our final remarks and end this session today. And thank you for everyone who's been here with us, who's listening in the audience. Thank you so much. I guess if people don't have anything to add, we can do our final remarks and end the session today. If Amira, if you can hear me. Okay. What I would like to say is just to are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. Did you want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you everyone for listening. I do appreciate it. Today, like we mentioned earlier, is the International Day for Peace. And we wanted to focus specifically on the Eritrean perspective because we do have a very unique situation, and that's completely different. The points that we touched on looked into why we should be recognizing internationally, I guess, acclaimed days, including the International Day of Peace. And as mentioned before, this is to show that we are part of the global community and to show that we can create events and recognition and acknowledgement for these events within a designated time period, so including today's day. We can come together and speak on the issues that affect us and affect the global community at large. The second point we touched on was the lack of scholarly research and how this has been hindered due to the lack of peace that we have in Eritrea. The other point that we looked into was also the refugee crisis and how this is a direct issue and a direct effect of the lack of peace in the country as well as the region. And the last point that was just discussed right now by Ismail was peace, lack of peace and how its effects both internally and externally, so both geopolitically and within the country. So I think, as mentioned before, peace is a choice, and collectively we choose choose not to have peace. And maybe if I leave you with a message, it's for us just to choose peace. I think we have had enough as Eritreans. It's been too much. Not only has it been 30 years that we haven't seen any peace since independence, but even prior to that, the 30 years that we tried to gain independence and we still did not see peace after. So I think enough is enough. We need to go back to our homelands. We need to rebuild. And we need peace. We need our refugees to go back home. And we need to develop our country. We need to develop our lands. So that's all I have to say for now. Thank you everyone for listening. And if anyone has anything to say, please come up. If not, Smile, you can go ahead.
Thank you. While talking to the the timeline of Eritrea, I tried to avoid touching upon the situation that is happening in Ethiopia, and I think one thing to say about that is just Eritrean troops should and need to get out, pull out from Ethiopia. I think that's the first thing that we should be. That it shouldn't be a point that we need to speak about, because these are, in a way or another, our brothers, our sisters, our relatives, and we have a moral responsibility to say that they should leave the country, and the country shouldn't be involved in war. Any justification is unacceptable. And the reason it becomes unacceptable is now we are invaders. We're not protecting ourselves. We're not regaining our land or sovereignty and all of these issues that we've heard for the past 20 years. Now we are invading a country. We are invading a people. And in a state of war, you cannot control every single soldier, and anything can happen. Every single violation of the basics of basic human rights can happen, and it's deemed to happen. So, all we should be advocating for, we wouldn't want any foreign power to come to our country, and we also don't want to go to any externally to any other country or any other, destabilize any other society. And this should be our moral stance. And this is and if anything, as Eritreans, because of what's happening, because of this group's actions, I think at some point we might have to say to apologize for the people who've been affected by our troops, because it is our moral responsibility to say sorry to them. And I think we need to look. This war is not something that we can just overlook or bypass. It's something that's going to affect us as we go for the next generation or so. It would the region is damaged for another 25 years, and for us to rectify the damage that's been done and to remedy it, we need to start now by looking into ways of peace and engagement with the people. I'm not talking about governments and all of that. I think the people primarily, because the people were the subjects of any action that was taken by the different governments. My final thoughts would be, if we can fund war, we can fund peace. And I leave you with that. Just ponder upon that idea. If we can fund war, we can fund peace. And I'll leave you in peace. Thank you.